the book of Daniel and for the prophecy that we are studying, particularly because we can look at it now as history that verifies the accuracy in which you predict the future. And that in turn helps us to appreciate that all the promises you've made for us are accurate, and that we just have to be patient and wait in your time for it all to come to pass. In the meantime, help us to grow in our understanding of your word, and help us to gain the important lessons, though there are many details that we'll not retain. At least we will be blessed by knowing what is in your word and the purpose for having put it there for our benefit and for the benefit of all who are interested in learning what your will for our lives is. You gave Daniel great encouragement at a time which he was quite disturbed because of the vision that was presented to him. And perhaps there are those today who are disturbed because there's much in the Word of God that they have difficulty in understanding. But help us to devote our attention to try to understand as much as we can, and knowing that there's enough that we can understand that's going to keep us busy as long as we live. I pray your Holy Spirit will guide us in our thinking, that our unity together will be expressed by our love for one another and the mutual encouragement we give to one another by our mere presence here. So I thank you for each one. Thank you most of all for your presence and your Spirit to guide us. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
We ended last week with verse 22. Let me just go back and read that verse so we remember what we talked about when we ended that. The overflowing forces, which I understand to be primarily the forces of Egypt, but also the forces of Syria that are down there, will be flooded away. In other words, the armies are going to be battling back and forth, and the way the war goes is going to kind of be like a teeter-totter. At one time it looks like one might be ahead, the other time another one be ahead. Before him, and the him here in this verse refers to Antiochus Epiphanes, that's Antiochus IV, and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant, Onias III, who's the last godly priest in Jerusalem. So when we asked the question last week, number 2, who is the prince of the covenant? In case you didn't get that, this is his name, O-N-I-A-S, and that's really kind of sad when you realize that he was the last of all of the entire history of the Jews of a man who occupied the position of priest that was a godly man. Well, now this is back during the intertestamental period, and the Jews are going to continue all the way to the time of the coming of Christ. But that reminds us that corruption had taken place in the high places, in the people that were supposed to be offering sacrifices and giving guidance to the people. Well, when we realize that this is true, that he's the last godly high priest, does that help us to understand why Jesus had a problem with the high priest in his day? They were corrupt. That's not when the corruption began. It began way back here. Actually, it began much sooner, but from this time on, this is the thing that makes this significant. He's the last of the godly ones. Now, there were a lot of ungodly ones before, but there are always some godly ones. But from this time on, there is not one that we have any record of at all. So, and his brother is the one who took over his place. And his brother surrendered his authority, or his power, or his position, to Antiochus Epiphanes. In other words, he wanted to get along with the powers that be, and so he just said, I'll work for you. Now, let me explain something else that I want us to have in the back of our mind as we continue on today. Syria's to the north, Egypt's down here in the south, and Palestine's right here in the middle. And that's where the battleground is taking place much of the time. Egypt wants to control this area. Syria wants to control this area. Both of them are concerned about the fact that this area of Palestine worship the true God. And both the Egyptians and the Syrians worship pagan gods. And what they want more than anything else is to say, listen, Greece is the world power. And when Alexander the Great conquered the whole world for Greece, and he died, then the rule was divided among 4 of his generals. Both of these generals, one at Syria and one at Egypt, wanted to get Palestine on board. And they really had trouble doing it. But they finally began to make an inroad when they got rid of this guy. And his brother Jason became the high priest. And Jason was willing to turn against the real God and accept the pagan gods. It was a political move on his part. And it just is a sad commentary when people who claim to be Christians, who know God, actually act as if there's nothing unique about being a child of God. This really bothers me today when there are people who call themselves Christians and they are taking a non-Christian position and they're standing up for people that do not honor God. They're idolaters or they're worshipers of other religion. How do I have trouble with tolerating evil around us? But to ever assume that it's all right for us to act like we are one of them, that's where it's wrong. And that's exactly what had happened here. All right, new territory here now. Verse 20, yes.
What year would that have been? Around 175 BC or 187 BC?
Well, Antiochus Epiphanes, the dates that I always remember, the 3.5 years that he had, this would be a little bit before that, but 3.5 years of Jewish wars that were trying to regain their freedom from Antiochus Epiphanes was between 185, 187 and 1. No, that's not right. What are those 3.5 years? Ordinarily, I just... Anyhow, it's about 180 years earlier. Probably a little bit more from the time of Christ. So it'd be about 100... Probably 187. Yeah, it's 187 in June of 187 down to December of 185. That was the 3.5 years that they desecrated the temple. So this would be back before 187. So, yeah, be someplace between 187 and 200 years before the time of Christ. Yeah, good question. All right. Verse 23, after an alliance is made with him, this him refers to Antiochus IV. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception. Now the he is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. And he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. Now, he's returning now from his war down in Egypt. He's back up home. And he's still trying to establish himself as their king. Remember, he has no right to be king. He was not born into a royal family. He was not selected by anybody to be king. He is making himself king. And he's doing so by deceit, by trickery, by any means that he can come up with to get the job done. So what is being described in this verse is the way in which Antiochus is trying to establish himself as not only in charge of Syria, he's not really in the line of succession of the others that have been up there who've been the kings. He's made himself that, but he's also trying to exert his influence to the south, that is, in Palestine among the Jewish people. The alliance is something that the details that is talked about here is not specified, so I don't really know anything more than just what the scriptures say. But I think the alliance would refer to whatever deals he could make with people to honor him and to work for him and to get behind, be a supporter of him. Probably whatever promises he made, lies that he told, they're not specified, but at least we know that that was done, and it was a part of the deception that he was practicing to gain power. All right, verse 24. In the time of tranquility, when you think of a time of tranquility, what do you think of?
Peace.
Yeah, when things are quiet, nobody's stirring up anything. So this is one of those periods of time, not too many of these back in those days, but this is one of those times, he will enter the richest parts, and the richest parts now is another effort to go back and to try to crush out Egypt. He wants to gain power down there too. Remember, they've got a fellow down there that's the Ptolemy, who became Ptolemy when he was 6 years of age. So he's just a kid. And his mother really kind of acts as advisors, but he has some other advisors too, because he's much too young to handle that himself. But Antiochus Epiphanes is going to take advantage of this fellow. And he's going to use trickery. We're going to get into that today too. But in the time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts, and the richest parts refers to the upper Egypt, which he was able to get from Egypt, of the realm, and he, that is Antiochus Epiphanes, will accomplish what his fathers, and the fathers here refer to the people that were on the throne before him, the people that were in charge up there before he was. He was able to accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them. Now, how's he going to get the job done? He's going to go in here and he's going to overtake a plush area of the country, and when they carry out the loot, he's going to divide it among his followers. Well, what's that going to do for his followers as far as their allegiance to him is concerned? That's exactly right. We're going to follow him, man. We like the way he treats us. Is it costing him anything? Not a thing. What did they call it? Rob Peter to pay Paul? But he's robbing here from the Egyptian people, and he's going to just disperse it among his own people. So he's bribing these men to be good followers and loyal followers of him. And he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. Now it means what power he's able to get is going to be limited. And who do you think limits the time that he's going to be able to do this? God. And this phrase here, but only for a time, I think reminds us that all of history is the unfolding of God's plan. And whether we like it or whether we know it or not, everything is fitting in exactly as God has outlined it time-wise. That doesn't mean that God likes everything that's going on. It does mean that what's going on that's not good is under the control of God. And when the appropriate time comes, he will put an end to that. But is he going to be able to accomplish something good in bad times? Romans 8:28 says yes. He makes all things work together for good to those who love the Lord. And I really believe that God is using Antiochus Epiphanes and what he's doing to the Jewish people to find out, okay, Jews, who really are on the Lord's side and who are not. And so this desecration of the temple that we're going to be talking about today, the Abomination of Desolation, is going to, what do they used to say, divide the men from the boys. It's going to find out who's really faithful to God and who isn't. Already we've seen now the downward road taken by the brother, Epiphanes III, the last godly high priest, but his brother's corrupt, and all the rest of them are going to be corrupt after that. Was there anybody left then that really appreciated Onias? Oh yes, there were. There were several good people. But this time of difficulty, listen folks, that's going to happen in our day. It's going to be interesting to see what happens if things get much worse in our country. We're going to find out very quickly, I think, how many people really are loyal to the Lord and how many are not. And I think people need to be prepared for that. And I think that God many times has allowed tough times to come to his people to find out, are you really for me or are you not? Now, what has Jesus said to us that should prepare us for that? Jesus said, if you follow me, I'm going to treat you the way they treated me. Now, folks, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been treated pretty well. And I may have been spoiled. And I wonder, is my faith really strong enough to live through those days when it's going to be tough? When I'm not going to be allowed to worship God in public as I want to do. When the force of the bee will imprison people. They'll persecute people. Folks, Christians around the world are being persecuted right now. We have been spared. But what will happen if God allows it to happen here at home? A lot of important lessons here. So, question number 1, who accomplished what his fathers never did? Who would that be? Antiochus IV. He's the one that we're talking about here in this verse. Antiochus IV. That's Antiochus Epiphanes. In fact, he's the one we're going to be talking about all the time today. Number 2, what's the meaning for only a time? That means God has a limit. And God's timing is not our timing, but God's timing is always right. In fact, when back in chapter 9, he said there's going to be 70 weeks, did that turn out exactly right?
Oh, yeah.
Sure did. And we've got a lot of verification for that. How could he do that in advance and specify these specific things are going to happen in this way, at that place, if he didn't know what he's talking about? God does put a limit. Why should we believe that all of a sudden he's lost control? And yet, have you ever heard anybody say, boy, it's hard to believe in God. How would God let all this kind of stuff happen? And I think we're just not thinking. We're just not thinking when we say that. Verse 25. He, that is Antiochus Epiphanes, will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south. That's Ptolemy VI. That's this boy that became king when he's age 6. With a large army, so the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. So when Antiochus Epiphanes returns once again down there and deals with this Ptolemy VI, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Now, what is Antiochus IV able to accomplish? On this time, he's able to overpower the Egyptian people. Now, how did that happen? Was it because the counsel that this young boy received was not good counsel? Did he cave in when he shouldn't? Was he tricked? How do we explain all this? Let's read on. Verse 26. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. All right, what does history record that explains this verse? Well, Antiochus, now, when he's down there with the king in Egypt, they're going to eat together. And Antiochus is going to pretend to be, hey, I'm one of the best friends you've got. And I know you're just getting started, and I'm an old pro at this. Let me help you out. And they're just going to constantly act like they're the closest of friends. But he's setting him up because he's going to take advantage of this. In verse 27, as for both kings, that be Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table. What are they doing at this table? They're eating. Usually when you eat together, you're eating with friends. That's usually the truth, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But they're going to lie to each other, but it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. What's the appointed time? When God says it's going to happen, it will happen. So the two kings, the king of Syria and the king of Egypt, are eating together, and they're discussing things together. Now, what is said of the communication between these two kings? They're not telling the truth. They're both pretending. They're both pretending loyalty to each other. And yet both of them in their heart know, I'm setting you up. I'm going to get you. And one is saying that, the other is saying, you think you're setting me up, but you're really not. You're not going to fool me by your lies. So they're just kind of going back and forth. Both of them are hypocrites. They're both play acting. They're not telling the truth. Nothing good comes out of that. Who is the father of all lies?
Satan.
Satan. Beware of anything that is not true. That's exactly what's going on here, these two powers. Verse 28. Then he, that is Antiochus Epiphanes, will return to his land. What's his land? Syria, that's right. With much plunder. Where's he getting this from?
Egypt.
Egypt, sure. Tells you how successful he was in this time. His heart will be set against the Holy Covenant. The Holy Covenant refers to the land of Palestine. Refers to the Jewish people. Those who serve the true God. That's his heart. He wants to say, you people are still talking Hebrew or Aramaic, and you're still believing in one God. Let's get with it. Greek is the world power, and you need to speak the Greek language, and you need to adopt Greek culture, you need to worship the Greek gods, trying to get that done. He'll take action and then return to his own land, which is Syria. So, who's returning from where? Antiochus is returning from Egypt, having conquered Egypt. This is probably the upper part of Egypt, according to history, that he had conquered. Not all of Egypt, but the upper part, the plush part. Number 2, what does he do on his return home? Well, he, on his return home, decides he's going to try to make an impact upon the Jewish people and get them to surrender to his cause. And we learn from the book of 1 Maccabees, does 1st and 2nd Maccabees ring a bell to you?
Mm-hmm.
Why does that sound familiar?
It's 3.5 years ago.
That's where you learn about it, yeah. That's where we're getting a lot of this history from. But what else do you know about 1st, 2nd Maccabees?
It's in the Catholic Bible, but not ours.
That's exactly right. What do we call those books that the Catholic Bible has that we don't have?
Pitiful? No, I'm just kidding.
Apocrypha.
Apocrypha.
Yeah, Apocrypha. I think there are 14 Apocrypha books, if memory serves me correctly. The only 2 that have any value at all are 1st and 2nd Maccabees.
Because of their historic.
That's right. They're history. The rest of them are fanciful. Just wild tales. And why they ever put that in their Bibles, I don't know. Well, I do too know. There's some things suggested in there that substantiate what they want to believe, but it's not in the Bible itself. So they just added those books to say it has some relevance for saying, well, this isn't our Bible, it may not be in yours. All right, on his way home, he's going to confiscate a lot of the stuff that's in the temple. Going to take it back with him. Well, number 3, what is meant by the Holy Covenant? I indicated as I was reading this, the Holy Covenant would be, he wants the land of Palestine, he wants the people of Palestine. So the Holy Covenant would be God's people that live in the promised land. They are a holy people because of the people of God, and they live in a holy land because it's the land that God gave to them. So the Holy Covenant is simply prophetic words to refer to the land where the Jews live and the Jews that live in that. Now, I think that the prophecy that is made here by Daniel, as Daniel's having revealed to him, is intended to give strength to the Jewish people to face the future. If they read and study the book of Daniel as prophecy is unfolding, remember, before Christ ever comes, if they're reading what Daniel has written, they're going to see that he's describing pretty much things that are beginning to unfold in their own time. How's it all going to turn out? We'll find out. Verse 29, at the appointed time, which turned out to be 168 BC, 168 BC, he'll return and come into the south, Egypt, but this last time, it will not turn out the way it did before. So there's kind of a yo-yo experience. He's going back to Egypt, but he's not going to have the kind of success that he had on his previous visit. Not the same results. Verse 30, for the ships of Kittim. Now, Kittim really refers to Cyprus, but the significance of the island of Cyprus is this refers to all those lands along the northern shore of the Mediterranean area. So, ships from these various areas, this would refer to all these points west that are coming to bear here. The ships of Kittim are invaders from the west. They will come against him. Therefore, he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. He's angry, and he's going to vent his anger against the Jews as he comes back through the Jewish territory again. He will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So what he's going to do is become a real good friend of the Jews who've already caved in and are no longer remaining faithful to God. So what opposition does Antiochus IV confront? He is confronting opposition from other Greek powers that are siding with Egypt against him. Now remember, The king down in Egypt, does he rightfully have the throne? Yes, he does. Does Antiochus Epiphanes in Syria rightly have the throne? No, he does not. That's going to become important a little later on in our study. He pretends to be the king. He has no right to pretend that or to assume that position. Now, upon whom did Antiochus take out his frustration? Jews. The Jewish people, that's right. What information do we gain from Josephus' Wars, Book 1, Chapter 1, Section 1 and 2? Well, you have this in your notes. Let me just read it through, and if you have trouble, stop me, and I'll try to explain it if I can. At the same time that Antiochus, who is called Epiphanes, had a quarrel with the 6th Ptolemy, that's Ptolemy number 6, about his right to the whole country of Syria, a great sedition fell among the men of power in Judea. You know what that means? These are Jews that are turning away from God. Great number. And they had contention about obtaining the government, while each of these that probably is a typo, it's that were of dignity could not endure to be subject to their equals. However, Onias, one of the high priests, got the better, and cast the sons of Tobias out of the city, who fled to Antiochus, and besought him to make an expedition into Judea. The king, being therefore disposed beforehand, complied with him, and came upon the Jews with a great army, and took their city by force, and slew a great multitude of those who favored Ptolemy, and sent out his soldiers to plunder them without mercy. He also spoiled the temple, and put a stop to the constant practice of offering daily sacrifice of expiation for 3 years and 6 months. That's 3.5 years that the temple was desecrated. We're leading up to that. It's going to be spelled out for us in the next few verses. Antiochus was not satisfied either with his unexpected taking of the city, or with its pillage, or with the great slaughter he had made there, but being overcome with his violent passions, and remembering what he had suffered during the siege, he compelled the Jews to dissolve the laws of their country, and to keep their infants uncircumcised. Now, folks, what we're reading here is what was imposed upon the Jewish community when Antiochus was in charge. You can't offer your sacrifices. You can't worship God in the temple. You can't administer circumcision. You cannot do these things. And they forced them to sacrifice swine's flesh on the altar, against which they all opposed themselves, and the most approved among them were put to death. So, did the people die for their faith in God at that time? That's what he's saying. That's what secular history is saying. Reading on, furthermore in Josephus, and this is Antiquities, Book 12, Chapter 5 and Section 4. When the king, that is Epiphanes, had built an idol altar upon God's altar, he slew swine. That's a typo. It should be swine, not wine. He slew swine upon it, and so offered a sacrifice neither according to the law, nor the Jewish religious worship in that country. He also compelled them to forsake the worship which they had paid to their own God, and to adore those whom he took to be gods, and made them build temples and raise altars in every city and village, and offer swine upon them every day. He also commanded them not to circumcise their sons, and threatened to punish any that should be found to have transgressed his injunction. He also appointed overseers who should compel them to do what he commanded, and indeed many Jews there who were compelled with the king's commands, either voluntarily or out of fear of penalty, that was denounced, but the best men and those of the noblest souls did not regard him, but did pay a greater respect to the customs of their country than concern as to the punishment which he threatened to the disobedient, on which account they every day underwent great miseries and bitter torments. They were whipped with rods, their bodies were torn to pieces, they were crucified while they were still alive and breathed. They also strangled those women and their sons whom they had circumcised, as the king appointed, hanging their sons about their necks as they were upon the crosses, and if there were any sacred book of the law found, it was destroyed, and those with whom they were found miserably perished also. That's a pretty sad picture. Now, all this is a part of understanding the abomination of desolation. This is the kind of a horrible period. Now, that's important for us in understanding the New Testament also. We're going to get to that.
Would this be the time that a lot of the manuscripts were put in caves?
That's a good question. Possibly. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Because during the intertestamental period is when they translated the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek, and we find these hidden. The Qumran caves were one of the places where they found them. Most likely. Thank you for bringing that up. I need to go back and check my dates on exactly when some of these earliest manuscripts were dated back to that had been found. One more quotation here in this lengthy paragraph. After this, having spoiled the city of all of its riches, they, that is the force of Epiphanes, set it on fire in several places, demolished the houses, pulled down the walls around it, and then with the ruins of the demolished city, built a strong fortress on top of the eminence of an eminence in the city of David, which was over against the temple, and overlooked and commanded the same, and there placed a strong garrison, and making it a place of arms against the whole nation of the Jews, stored it with all manner of provisions of war, and there also they laid up the spoils which they had taken in sacking the city. This fortress, by the advantage of its situation, being thus higher than the mountain of the temple, and commanding the same, from thence gathering the soldiers, fell on all those that went up thither to worship, and shed blood on every side of the sanctuary, and defiled it with all manner of pollutions, so that from this time the temple became deserted, and the daily sacrifice omitted, and none of the true converts of God durst any more to go up thither to worship till Judas, after 3.5 years, having recovered out of it the hands of the heathens, purged the place of its pollutions, and by a new dedication restored it again to its pristine use. That's the end of the 3.5 years of the Abomination of Desolation, when they're able to restore temple worship. That's what the Jews celebrated in the time of Jesus. It's called the Feast of Dedication. That's what Jews today remember when they observe Hanukkah in December. Verse 31. Forces from him, that is from Antiochus Epiphanes, will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, that's the temple, and do away with the regular sacrifice, that's the sacrifices that are ordained by God through the law of Moses. They will set up their abomination of desolation, that is, making pagan that which God intended to be holy. Now, number one, what does 2 Maccabees inform us concerning this period of time? Again, I put this in your notes so you'd be sure and have this, so I'll just read this with you. In the word of 2 Maccabees, when news of what had happened reached the king, he took it to mean that Judea was in revolt. So raging inwardly, he left Egypt and took the city by storm. He commanded soldiers to cut down relentlessly every one they met, and to slay those who went into the houses. Then there was killing of young and old, destruction of boys, women, and children, slaughter of virgins and infants. Within the total of 3 days, 80,000 were destroyed, 40,000 in hand-to-hand fighting, and as many were sold into slavery as were slain. That is secular history backing up what Daniel is relating to us prophetically as God reveals the meaning of his vision to him.
Was that Antiochus?
Antiochus Epiphanes, right. Sure was. So what is the abomination of desolation? That is simply making a holy place unholy. It's the abuse of that which is holy. We might call it being sacrilegious. I won't comment. Verse 32. By smooth words, he, that is Antiochus Epiphanes, will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Now what's that telling us? That's telling us not everyone's going to cave in. There's some faithful people. They're going to fight back. They're going to stand up for what they believe. They know that what they believe is what God wants them to do. I just shuffled some papers around here, now I forgot where I am. Am I ready for verse 33 or question number 2?
There's a comment under verse 32.
Comment under verse 32? Okay, thank you.
Frido's connection.
Okay, yeah, okay, I'll read that comment under verse 32. The year his 168. At this time Judas Maccabeus, with some others that accompanied him, fled into the wilderness, and there lived in great hardship, subsisting themselves upon herbs, and what else the mountains and woods could afford them, till they gained an opportunity to take up arms for themselves and their country, in a manner as well will be hereafter related. These measures of Epiphanes induced an open revolt, whose leader was the priest and patriot Matthias of Modin. His bold deed of the public murder of a royal official was a sign for the beginning of the revolt. Fleeing to the mountains, he, with the cooperation of the five heroic sons, organized war on a small scale. He then died in 166 BC. So Judas Maccabeus is the one that comes to our mind when we think about the revolt of the people against what Antiochus was trying to do in destroying the Jewish religion, taking over the Holy Land for themselves. Number 2, who does resist what Antiochus is doing?
The Maccabees.
Yes, and let me say this another way, just to impress it upon us. Those who enjoyed a right relationship with God. These are the ones who are resisting. They still are in favor of doing God's will in their lives. Now, the degree of that relationship I'm not able to comment upon, but they at least did not cave in to a pagan king. When I make a statement like I just made, I want to say something to further clarify that. I don't really think that everybody today in our country who claims to be a Christian is a Christian. And so I don't want to say something that I can't back up. So to what degree did these people really believe in God and the Jewish faith? Well, at least strong enough that they want to do something about it. But you remember what Jesus said in Luke 6:46? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, if you don't do what I tell you to do? And what he said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23, many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, do we not prophesy in your name, do miracles in your name, perform wonderful works in your name? Lord said, I don't know you. Depart from me, you cursed. So I don't want to pretend to know what I don't know, but I know that these people at least were pretended to be on the right side in the relationship with God. And God knows who they are. Verse 33, those who have insight among the people, that would be the people, the Jews that are remaining faithful to God, will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. And the many days turns out to be 3.5 years. That would be from June 168 to December 165. So that's the period of time that defines this phrase, for many days. Now, will anyone speak to preserve the true faith? Yes, they will. those Jews who remain loyal to God are going to stand up and be accounted. Verse 34. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help. I think the little help that God is going to allow them to have is going to come from Judas Maccabeus and his 5 sons. I think that's what the little help is. And many will join with them in hypocrisy, pretending to be faithful Jews. Now that's interesting, isn't it? They're going to pretend to be a part of it, but they're not. They're hypocrites. Is there such a thing as hypocrites in the church today?
Yeah.
Sure are. And we have to be careful that we're not numbered among them. Now, what is a little help? I think it is a little help. It's not great big help. It didn't prevent everything bad from happening. And a lot of lives were lost during the time. But at least this is a time when they're fighting for the religious freedom. And this is a time when you find out, okay, what are you really made of? How strong is your faith in God, really? And so those who really stood firm would be on the side of those who tried to regain their freedom from this evil tyrant, Antiochus Epiphanes. Verse 35. Some of those who have insight will fall. What does that mean? Well, they're going to die. They're going to be killed in the conflict. But they have not fought in vain, even though they die for their faith. God will take note of that. In order to refine, well, this is where it comes in. Some will die, some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, make them pure until the end time. What's God doing here? God's wanting to make sure that when Jesus comes, there will be those of the Jewish community who still believe in God. And he's making sure that there's going to be that remnant that will be there. Does that cause you to think about the future? One day, when the Lord comes, there's going to be a great division take place. There will be Christians caught up to be with the Lord in the air. But I think it's going to be a day of great surprises. I think we're going to be shocked that some of the people didn't make it. And I would call those people first-class hypocrites, many of them. They really put on a show. They pretended to be so religious, so faithful. But God looks in the heart, and we can't make that judgment. God makes that judgment. But anyhow, when we are put to the test and we pass the test, folks, that makes us a better Christian. Some of the Christians who are some of the sweetest people you ever know have gone through hardships that most people don't have to go through. And yet their faith has been strong through it all. I think that's so important. Well, let me read this verse again. I won't interrupt myself this time. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Now, the appointed time ends up being the end of the Old Testament period. That's the appointed time. God has determined a time when the law will have served its purpose. By the way, when did the law finally cease to be in place?
When Jesus died.
At the cross, when Jesus died. Colossians 2:13, 14. The handwriting, this is contrary to us, was nailed to the cross. Does Judea suffer through a time of testing and purging?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. By the way, did the first church in the first century go through a time of purging and suffering? Yes. There were 10 major efforts by Roman emperors to wipe out Christianity. All 10 of them failed. But during this time, Christians were driven underground into catacombs. People were killed. It was just terrible things that were going on. What is the appointed time? Well, it's a time when the Lord returns and the Old Testament period comes to an end. By the way, in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. There's an interesting verse that I think really is significant here. In the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, under the law. What does that mean? When the time was right. Now, there are a lot of things that had to happen if the prophecy is going to be fulfilled. And God knew exactly what these things were. And he's going to make a lot of these things turn out for good. They're going to make medium-strength Christians really strong Christians. That's a part of it. It's going to get rid of some of the rough edges that people think, you know, I have not been as faithful as I should. I'm going to get rid of some of these sins that so easily beset me. I'm going to be more committed to the Lord. Verse 36. Then the king. Now, at this point, let me skip down to question number 1. Who is the king? There are a lot of differences of opinion here. The two primary positions that I think are worth considering, and the one that your textbook uses, is Herod the Great. Herod the Great. The one that was ruling when Jesus was born. Others think it was Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, why these two? Is there anything similar to these two? Oh, yes, there is. I've given you a chart on Herod, and I'm going to refer to that after a while. But I want to talk about that. He was just Antiochus Epiphanes all over again. Remember, he's the one that said, when he heard that a king had been born at Bethlehem, oh, when you see that star, when you know this, oh, got to take action. Kill all the baby boys, 2 years and under. Just slaughter them. Get rid of them. I will not allow anybody to take my kingship away from me. And, you know, he murdered members of his own family, wives, sons. Terrible, terrible history of Herod the Great. We'll say something more about that after a bit. Then the king. I'm going to presume that it's Herod the Great. I'm not going to try to convince you of that, but it will be consistent with what you read in the book that some of you have. So, then the king, Herod the Great, will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. So, number 2, how did the king exalt himself? Well, the Bible says he did what he wanted to do. He had a stubborn will, and he's going to do whatever he wants to do. That fits both Antiochus and Herod the Great. How long will the king prosper? Well, until the indignation is finished. This is talking about until this whole issue of falling away from the faith, trying to destroy God's people, when that's finally finished. Now, folks, that's going to happen when we have another Abomination of Desolation, which happens in 70 A.D. Same thing that happened back in times of Antiochus Epiphanes. It's going to happen in 70 A.D. So how long will the king prosper? Well, Herod himself is going to die in 4 B.C., which is after the birth of Christ. So you realize Jesus was born about 5 B.C. And the way you explain that is our calendars are out of whack. But we've lived with it this long. Verse 37. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, that's the Jews, or for the desire of women. He's going to be an immoral person. Nor will he show regard for any other god. He will magnify himself above them all. And obviously, Herod the Great is magnifying himself above the God of heaven, who is fulfilling prophecy. By the way, when Herod the Great learned that a king was born from the wise men, how did he find out where he was born?
They told him.
Who told him?
The wise men.
Well, the wise men didn't know. They were inquiring, where is he?
He went to the priest, didn't he?
That's exactly right.
Oh,
Did the priests know their Old Testament?
yes.
Yeah, they did. Isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
They knew their Old Testament. But what is very striking in that whole record in Matthew, though they knew exactly where he's going to be born, not a word is said about them going down to see. The wise men went down. Shepherds went down. Not the priests. Not the Pharisees. They knew what the Old Testament said. That's telling, isn't it?
Mhm.
To know what the Bible says and then disregard it, not to pay attention to it. This is prophecy being fulfilled. It's exactly what Micah said in Bethlehem, Judea. They quoted the prophet Micah. They knew their Bible. Of what use is it to know the Bible if you're not going to live by it? You know, and a lot of people, I think, just think, well, I'm religious because, hey, ask me any question, I'll answer it for you. Oh no, listen, there are a lot of smart people that are pretty ignorant. Well, so what is meant by showing no regard for the gods of their fathers? He rejects the religion of the Jewish people. What's the desire of women? Don't know for sure. Some people think this refers to the real damage that was done by all the mothers that lost their little babies at this time, that he ordered them to be killed. Other people think that he was a homosexual. This is speculation. We don't really know, but it is immoral, obviously. Verse 38, but instead, he will honor a God of fortresses, a God who his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. So what does the king honor? He honors the God of war. He honors the God of authority, power. He builds fortresses. By the way, people who travel to the Holy Land today oftentimes include Masada in their visit. This is the Herod that built Masada, a fortress way up high in the southern part. He also built a fortress there in Jerusalem. Verse 39, he, talking about Herod, I believe, will take action against the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Who's the foreign god going to be? Well, this is, at the time of Herod, Greece is no longer the world power. Who is by now?
Rome.
Rome. So obviously this is referring to the help he had from the Roman people. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him and will cause them to rule over the many and will parcel out land for a price. Now, is the king primarily interested in himself?
Yep.
Certainly is. In fact, when King Herod died, he knew he was about to die. And looking forward to that day, he was 70 years old when he died. Anticipating that day, he had ordered one of the members of his family to make sure that on the day that he died, everyone that he had imprisoned, and he had imprisoned a lot of the most important people in the area, the Jewish people, he said, I want you to kill every one of them. And the reason he ordered that to be done is so that they would mourn his death, because he knew that no one was going to mourn his death, but they would the death of all these other people. And so he wanted to make sure there would be a mass mourning all over the country. But that was never carried out. It wasn't done. But this chart that we have, I'll say more about it after a bit, but one of the man who took charge after Herod died is Archelaus. And the thing that is said about Archelaus is that he tried to out-Herod Herod. And right after he became king, he ordered 6,000 people to be killed, just to show I'm the one in charge. That's all. No wonder when Mary and Joseph in Egypt learned that Archelaus had taken over their father's position, they said, hey, we're not going back to Bethlehem. We're going up to Nazareth. That's where they went. Because that is an area that wasn't ruled over by Archelaus. All right, verse 40. At the end time, and I understand the end time to be the end of the Jewish community, the king of the south, who by this time is a ruler, and it's a woman, it's Cleopatra, will collide with him, and the king of the north, who at this time is going to be Caesar Augustus, will storm against him, that is against Herod, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships, and he will enter countries, overflowing them, and pass through. So now we're getting into Roman history. And that's a whole other story about how Rome conquered the world and all the battles that were fought during the time of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and others. Well, the king of the south is, as I indicated, a ruler, Cleopatra. Who is the king of the north? Probably Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus was now ruling Syria as a part of the great Roman Empire. Verse 41, he will also enter the beautiful land. If this is right, that Caesar Augustus is the one, he's going to come down into the Holy Land. The beautiful land will be Palestine, where the Jews are. And many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the foremost sons of Ammon. So they're going to conquer some area for the Roman Empire. But they're not able to get Moab and Edom. They just were not successful in that area on this occasion. So this is being talked about in this verse. I think it's talking about Augustus on his way through Judea to Egypt, going by land now rather than crossing the Mediterranean to get Egypt under their control. Verse 42, then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. How does history verify this verse? Well, by the fact that Roman history will tell you that he conquered all the lands except the very ones that are mentioned in the previous verse. He didn't conquer those. And that he did go to regions of Africa, and all you have to do is look at the map of the Roman Empire to see what was conquered at this time. Verse 43, but he, that is Augustus, will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt, and Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. So Augustus is doing like his predecessor Antiochus did. He's carrying back the loot, the wealth of North Africa. Verse 44, but rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. All right, what rumors from the east? Does that bring to your mind something that happened to Herod the Great? Where'd the wise men come from? The east. Folks, here it is. History, prophecy. Rumors from the east. They regard as rumors. And from the north will disturb him. So he's getting different messages really bothering him. But the thing that happened that the wise men said to him when we found out where this child was to be born, that really bothered him. And that part is included in the Bible to verify the accuracy of this particular verse, I think, as well as others. Upon whom is the attention focused in this verse?
Jesus.
I think he's focusing attention here probably upon Herod and what he did in slaughtering the children in Bethlehem. What might the rumors of the north be? There was a lot of correspondence going on back and forth that really bothered Herod. And this is why he killed some of his own sons. Because he knew, some of his sons were saying, you know, I'm afraid Dad's never going to die. We're going to be old men. We want to start reigning before he dies. So let's make some effort to try to get him killed. He got word of that. He got word of that in time to make sure that they were executed. So he killed members of his own family. Verse 45. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end and no one will help him. I think the seas here would refer to the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea. Mediterranean Sea to the west, the Dead Sea to the east. What is the beautiful holy mountain? That would be Jerusalem, and particularly the mount upon which the temple was built. What is the tragic picture in this verse? Well, the tragic picture is that Herod himself is going to die as a result of trying to destroy God's plan, but it's not going to work out that way. Which brings us into chapter 12, and we'll start that chapter next week, and we'll finish our study next week. And I will, at that time, say several things about this chart, but hang on to this chart and bring it back with you on the Herod the Great. It's just a lot of interesting things, and several of these people are mentioned in the New Testament. Not all of them, several of them are, so we'll resume our study next week at that point. Let's pray. Father in heaven, a lot to think about. Help us at least to understand the overall picture. Help us to see that those who revolt against you are fighting a losing battle. And help us never to become discouraged when good people have to suffer. And help us to always remain faithful to you when those around us choose to be unfaithful. Help us to be bright, shining stars and lights in this dark world. May we take very seriously that our primary responsibility is to live to your glory in everything we do, in everything we say. May we so do. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Professor Bourne.
Thank you, good people. You folks are a blessing to me.
Judy, this is excellent.